Every clock in this room, including my phone, have a different time. So I'm going to use my phone because I trust it the most. So we have about a minute. Okie dokie. So according to my smartwatch and my phone, it is now 10 o'clock. According to that clock at the computer, I don't know what time it is, but that's okay. We'll go ahead and get started. So today we're going to continue this lecture. And we are going to start talking not only about psychology and scientific literacy, but also the field of psychology in a little more abstract way. And thinking about what you should be learning as a psychology major, and then also what career options and grad school options will be available to you as a psychology graduate. For some of you in May, for some of you in a couple years. Alrighty, so go ahead and start our slideshow here. And get our non-covering captions going. Alrighty, so as we've been talking about all semester, hopefully doesn't surprise anyone in this room right now, psychology is a really great field to cover scientific literacy, right? We are all about critical thinking, we're all about using the scientific method, and we're all about applying that, right? So our research tends to be people. Our research tends to be everyday life and trying to solve problems that people experience, right? And so introductory psychology in and of itself starts to provide a good foundation for thinking about science and thinking about how do we get this knowledge and how do we apply it. But a lot of people, hopefully no one in this room, but a lot of people are still skeptical about whether psychology itself is a science. And some people will argue that it's like politically correct, or I guess the term now we use is woke, to talk about psychology as a field, when really we're just trying to be inclusive and scientific, right? People will just say, oh, well, psychology is all just intuition and common sense. And to be perfectly honest, and we're going to talk about this at the beginning of the end of the slide, at the beginning of therapy, this was true. We didn't have a scientific basis. We did just sort of conjecture and try stuff, right? we've come a long way since then. And as we've talked about throughout the semester, people hold these pseudoscientific views and say, oh, well, this is because of that, and this is because of that, and like, you don't need psychology to tell you that. And some of those are really wrong. We obviously use the scientific method. So anytime I design a study, we're digging into the literature, we're coming up with hypotheses, we're tying it to theoretical things, and then we design a method, we collect our data, we see what our results are, and sometimes they're great. I actually got the chance to look over proofs for a study that's coming out soon this morning, and I wrote back my co-author, and I'm like, this is a great study. Like, I'm really proud of us. I think this is a really good contribution. And sometimes you get a data set and you do not find it all what you expected, and you don't find anything interesting, and you're like, well, that kind of feels like a waste of time, right? And that's science. Like, sometimes science just goes wrong. Sometimes science just like, you don't find anything interesting. And that's sort of just the grind of day to day. But I do have to say that happens in all science, natural sciences too. And one of the things we try to do now as a modern discipline is to ground our research and practice in theory. And our theories can change. So, you know, we rag on Freud a lot, right? In psychology, because I mean, the really interesting thing is Freud was trained in neurology. He actually was trying to be scientific, and he came up with a theory of neurons, actually, that talked about them using like the id and the ego. But he just did not have the techniques or the skills available to him to actually do it scientifically. So he was over-influenced by his own experiences, which happens to the best of us, right? And so his psychoanalytic theory now is largely dismissed by psychologists, although there still are people who practice psychoanalysis today and really dig into it. And you know what? If it's working for their clients, good for them, even if it's just an elaborate placebo, right? But, you know, we often sort of like hold up people like Skinner, right? Skinner was great. He did all this research. We learned a lot about behavior and reinforcement. But Skinner wasn't perfect. Skinner thought anything that happened in the brain, in the mind, was a black box we did not need to worry about. So if you think about like all of modern psychology and how much we focus on cognition and emotions, right, and processing, Skinner is just as problematic in that way. And so we've obviously adapted and come much further since then. But some people still think we're kind of rooted in that and have these misconceptions, right? That psychology is very unscientific, just an art. And there is an art to therapy, don't get me wrong. You can have the best supported therapy in the world, but when you're face to face with that client, if it's not working for them, you've got to be able to think on your feet and empathize, right? And do what works for that particular client. I really like this quote. For scientific literacy is not just about what we know, it's about how we know it, right? We can quote unquote know things by like gut instinct, and like sometimes those things are totally right, right? In psychology and in scientific literacy in general, we want to base the how we know it on science and on what the data are saying. And then also how we conduct our lives based on that, right? So I don't know if they're still requiring it for y'all, but I know when the vaccines came out for COVID, everybody had to have them, right? And so I'm guessing pretty much everybody in this room has been vaccinated with at least one or more of the vaccines, right? We know there's lots of research to back that up. What's amazing about the development of the COVID-19 vaccine is that they did everything you typically do in years-long studies. They just had the funding to do it faster. So I'll give you an example. I was in a trial for the booster last year, and actually I was in a trial this year for this year's booster, which is now just calling the COVID shot, like the flu shot. And every time I go into the office, there's a whole bunch of other people in there doing the same study I am. I tried to participate in a study for another medical condition I have. Turns out mine wasn't severe enough, which is a good problem to have, right? Like if it's not bad enough to like meet the trial, you're doing all right, right? And I was the only one in the office that day, right? So like those types of studies take years because they don't have the money or the resources to recruit them. Whereas they did all the tests they typically do for the COVID vaccine, they just did it faster, right? And so we conduct our lives based on that. We go and we get our flu shot and our COVID shot because we trust the science, at least people in this room, I'm guessing do. We know, unfortunately, there are other folks who don't. Thinking like a psychologist can be beneficial just in your day-to-day life, but also if you're thinking grad school, if you're thinking like a job in the future, right? Help you in those situations. So you can overcome misconceptions about people and behavior if you take a step back, right? And use your critical thinking skills and think about scientific literacy, like what's going on, why are people doing this? And so this is something I've had to challenge myself about for vaccine deniers, because I realized like I just had a lot of like anger about them for a while. And then I realized I needed to like figure out why they are thinking this way and acting this way. And it's like, they're not getting accurate information. No one on their side is showing them this data and telling them it has been vetted and it's not going to make you infertile or grow 3 arms, right? Or whatever the thing of the day is. And so that gives me more empathy towards those folks, right? People who have these psychological ways of thinking are better at problem solving and decision making because we can sit down and apply the principles we've been talking about all semester. We're actually better at being in relationships, although do admit it can be a challenge, especially like as I was going through grad school, there were times my husband would be like, you are therapizing me right now. This is not okay. And I'd be like, thank you for the check. I don't want to be doing that, right? And so once you navigate that and you kind of figure out how to use those roles, you know, it's helpful. And then it's understanding others and ourselves as well, which can be really insightful. Thinking like a psychological scientist helps you to avoid being misled. You can just say, what's the data on this? You can look it up, right? Go to Google Scholars, see what's being published in this area. You can look at things and avoid inconsistency, right? Try to apply the same principles across your life. And that helps with that potential hypocrisy, right? No one wants to be a hypocrite. It can help us start to poke holes in self-deception. I will say it's not perfect for that, right? And it helps us be critical of the idea of selective use of data, right? If I took those data sets I just described to you, or I didn't find anything interesting, and I like cleared out a few people here or there, I could probably get what I wanted, but that's not ethical, right? That's not what I'm supposed to be doing. So we've talked all this semester about, you know, like thinking like a psychologist and how do psychologists act and think and how can we apply these principles? But I think, especially since this course in particular ends up being like an intro to the psych major course, that it's really important to look at what do psychologists actually do? So like, what is the day-to-day job of a psychologist or a psychological scientist? And so I have a little video from APA that starts to touch on some of this that I'm going to share.
I'm a conservation psychologist. Conservation psychology is the use of all areas of psychology to try to better understand the human relationship with the natural world.
I study cognitive neuroscience. That's the study of memory, perception, decision-making.
I'm an organizational psychologist. We are the scientists that study people at work.
I'm a health psychologist. We try to develop programs that can help people change and live healthier lives.
And so those are just a few examples of what you can do that's not a clinical or a counseling psychologist. I think that, and it makes sense given like where people work within psychology. A lot of folks think like psychology equals therapy, right? And certainly, as I just mentioned, a lot of people within psychology are in the therapeutic setting. But there are so many other things you can do with a degree in psychology. Like if you want to make a lot of money as a psychologist, the industrial organizational psychologist that he mentioned studying people at work, that's where you can make a lot of money if that's your end goal, right? And some of these other fields are really growing, like health psychology. A lot of places are integrating psychologists into hospitals, into primary care practices. And so you're looking at like that mind-body connection in real time. And so I love just the idea of opening up what all could be something you could do. And so this is from the APA, again, the American Psychological Association. And again, these are not totally comprehensive, but this does show you just some of the main subfields within psychology. And again, they go way beyond what we think of as psychology, right? We think of psychology, we tend to think clinical and counseling. But in fact, you know, we've got brain science and cognitive psych. There are places where, you know, psychologists, neuropsychologists are doing brain scan studies and integrated into biology departments and neurology departments. You heard the conservation psychologists talk about it. So climate and environmental psychologists, basically, a lot of what they're doing is thinking about how can we convince people or motivate people to take care of our natural resources. Now, can we improve on how they interact with those? Developmental psychology, that's what Dr. Martirol is, or those of you who've had classes with her. These folks do research where they look at how people grow and adapt over the course of their lives. And when we think of developmental psychologists, we tend to think of like child psychology, but in fact, this is across the lifespan. And one of the biggest growing areas in psychology as the baby boomers age is geropsychology, which is studying of aging folks over 65, that type of thing. Experimental psychology in general is pure research and teaching, diving into these things. Forensic and public service psychology is a little bit different than people think. A lot of folks think, oh, I'm going to be a profiler. I'm going to be like these people on TV who are in court, right? And certainly there are people who do those things, right? But most people who work within this system will end up being like assessors. So they're the ones doing assessments for child custody evals, or they're the ones who are assessing people to see if they're possibly not guilty by reason of insanity. And public service, you could be working within police, FBI, but also other areas of public service. So there are psychologists hired to help influence public policy at a lot of nonprofits, but also within governmental organizations, right? We just mentioned health psych. So using psych for like public health type things, but also can be interventions in the moment. I did a lot of health psych when I was in grad school, to where I would be visiting people bedside while they're in the hospital. I even did assessments that way. Or I would, you know, work with somebody who was having psychological issues that were affecting their health, things along those lines. I worked in spinal cord rehabilitation, blind rehabilitation, physical rehabilitation, traumatic brain injury, lots of different options there. Human factors and engineering psychology, probably another place you can make a lot of money, actually. So these are people who study the interaction between people and technology. And so this can be things like figuring out how to make the most compatible prosthetic leg. But it can also be things like my Fitbit, right? So I have one of my best friends from grad school, her husband is an engineer who's a human factors engineer, and he now works for Fitbit and alongside psychologists and other folks figuring out the best way to make that work. Mentioned IO, studying the science of human behavior, the psychology of teaching and learning. So these would be people who are like educational psychologists. They might be working directly with the kids, or they might be researching how to help teachers best teach, or things along those lines. Quantitative psych, this is another place that's really growing. So these are the folks who come up with the statistical methods we use, or they're experts in stats. And so like, this is a nice way to get a lot of publications. If you're a quantitative psychologist, someone will be like, can you run my stats for me? And I'll make you a co-author on my paper. Yes, glad to do it, right? Rehabilitation psychology, you work with folks with chronic health conditions and disabilities to improve quality of life. Social psych, that's what Dr. Jackson is. So they are looking at how people interact with the rest of the world, and particularly with other people. And then sport and performance psych is another growing field. There's not like national certification or anything yet in there, but I wouldn't be surprised if this happened in the future. And I don't know if I mentioned, but Dr. Ariel is our cognitive psychologist. So we do have a nice little range. And so again, I think a lot of folks kind of focus in on these. And if you want to be a clinical or counseling psychologist, that's great. But there are lots of other ways to work in applied fields that might be of more interest to some folks, like a health or a sport situation. Now, one of the really interesting things that APA does is that APA has, I want to say it's over 40, it might be over 50 divisions. And each of those divisions champions a certain group or cause and really focuses in on research in that area or policy suggestions. So for example, I'm a member of Division 35, which is the psychology of women. And one of the most important things they've done in the past 10 years is they put out a report on the sexualization of girls and women and the consequences of that. The other division I belong to is Division 2, which is the Society for the Teaching of Psychology. And you can see by the fact that it's Division 2 that it was founded pretty early on in APA's history. So teaching has always been something we wanted to do well. Oh, great, they just moved it. Hang on, I should be able to find it pretty quickly. But one of the things they've done is put out guidelines for the teaching of psychology at the undergraduate level. And so these are things that we actually follow and use as our guide. And when we redesigned our major in 2020, we looked at these and said, what are we lacking? What do we need? And so I'm gonna go ahead and stick this on the PowerPoint just so I have the right link in the future. And so, for example, we were not doing a good job with one of the goals that centers around professional development. And so that's why our capstone is now ethics and professional development in psychology. We also have been looking at, here we go, this is the actual link to them. These are new, these are just approved in August. We didn't really have one of the things is like working with diverse people, and we didn't have something that focused on that. And so that's why you now are required to take at least one class that focuses on that so that you have some idea. But yeah, these are the guidelines for the undergraduate major. So there's this big document that lays out the goals. So our goals, and I'm going to go into these in more detail on the slides, but our content, knowledge, and applications, that one's pretty simple. That's why we have you take one from each of the boxes and like applied, biopsych, developmental, theory, things along those lines. Scientific inquiry and critical thinking. What have we been doing all semester, right? Values in psychological science, so ethical standards, communication, psychological literacy, and tech skills. So these are things we integrate into our classes. That's why we teach you APA style in this particular class, right? This is why we have you give a lot of oral presentations, because that really is one of the best ways that, like, in a business setting or a policy setting, or even at a conference setting, if you go the research route, that's how you'll be communicating information, right? And then personal and professional development. And there are these integrative themes that have been developed, and these are now the guidelines for how we should teach intro psychology. So let me go ahead and hop on back over here. And so knowledge base, right? We want to make sure you know something about psychology and the information behind psychology and how can you apply it. Thinking about how we use scientific reasoning, psychological and scientific literacy, problem solving, things along those lines. Ethical and social responsibility in a diverse world, right? So not only knowing our ethical standards, building and enhancing interpersonal relationships, which is why in a lot of upper level classes, I have folks do group projects, and then adopting values that build community. Communication, I just mentioned, and then professional, and now they've changed it to professional and personal development. And so based on that, we'll see if this link still works. Hey, this looks promising. One of the things we've started to look at, because companies that will hire you, education standards within our field are starting to emphasize this as well, is what skills are we teaching you? And how can you, basically, these are guides for you to, as you're preparing your resume, say, and you're wanting to say, what skills do you have that you could give to that company? You can think about these. So these are things that employers value. Analytical thinking. So the ability to solve complex problems, attend to details, plan proactively, and display comfort with ambiguity, right? A lot of times in psychology and upper level classes, people ask me questions and I'm like, I don't know, because we don't know, right? There's not research that shows that yet. Critical thinking, display proficiency with statistics, program evaluation, and research design for the study of social and technical systems. Creativity, using innovative and resourceful approaches to problem solving a new task. Yesterday, I wrote 4 letters of rec for folks who are applying to grad school. And I think just about everyone, so like you write your letter of rec, and then when you go to submit it, there's like a form that I, as the reviewer, have to like do checkboxes on. And I think almost everyone had a checkbox for creativity. So grad schools are looking for that. Employers are looking for that. Information management, being adept at locating, organizing, evaluating, and distributing information from multiple sources. You all know how to do that. You've done that in activities in this group or in this class, right? Where you look up information, you share it with the rest of the class. And then judgment and decision-making, engage in logical and systematic thinking and ethical decision-making when considering the possible outcomes of a particular action. Communication, again, this is something we teach you throughout our curriculum. Oral communication, strong active listening, really important, right? And this is why a lot of our upper level classes are seminar style. So like our capstone class, or those of you taking Psych of Gender with me next semester, so that you learn how to listen and communicate within that type of setting, like a boardroom setting, right? Conversational abilities in both informal and professional environments, as well as aptitude for public speaking and communicating scientific information to diverse audiences. And then in terms of written communication, comprehend relevant reading materials to produce professional documents that are grammatically correct, and technical or training materials, business correspondence, right? And again, we have you write all kinds of different things within our courses. Personal abilities, adaptability, being able to adjust to change, responding in flexible, proactive, and civil manners. I mean, you all are always dealing with this with us because you've seen me in my videos all semester, right? But also just like there's always new stuff coming out. There's always something where I'm like, oh, this paper was retracted, right? Integrity, performing work in an honest, reliable, and accountable manner that reflects the ethical values and standards of an organization. It's one of the reasons why this year I added the stuff about ChatGPT to this course, right? That's something that ethically workplaces have to figure out as they go forward, right? How are they going to use that, and how much is too much, and when can they use it properly? Self-regulation, being able to manage time and stress by completing assigned tasks with little or no supervision. Displaying initiative and persistence by accepting and completing additional duties in a careful, thorough, and dependable manner. And I like that they called this self-regulation, because this is not meant to be you take on everything you're asked to do, right? This is, you know what you can handle, and you say no to the stuff you don't. Saying no is one of the hardest skills to learn, but one of the most important. It's something that I sometimes still struggle with, but sometimes you just have to say, no, I can't do that. I'm really sorry. But this person would be great for it. In terms of social skills, collaboration, working in teams, sharing responsibility, listening and responding appropriately to others. So again, doing group work in here, in upper level classes, doing group projects. Inclusivity, demonstrating sensitivity to cultural and individual differences and similarities, again, important, right? By working effectively with diverse people, respecting and considering divergent opinions, and showing respect for others. Honestly, you all being here, you have a leg up on a lot of other psychology majors around the country, because a lot of universities still to this day are like 90+% white, right? And we're 40+% students from marginalized backgrounds, which is amazing. And so you all have experience interacting with those who differ from you, might have different opinions from you, right? And it's always like how you adapt and change in the moment. Give an example, and a couple of folks in here are in this class, my GWSS class this semester. One of my students shocked me by saying that they were the head of the college Republicans. And I was like, oh, did not expect that, right? And like very much not conservative on social issues. And so like having to reprogram my own brain of being like, okay, well, let's figure this out, right? And that person does a really good job sort of explaining it. But that's one of the skills psychology has given me. Leadership, establishing a vision for the group, creating long-term plans, and guiding and inspiring others. This is something you might not even realize you're gaining. So it's really interesting. When I first got here, I realized there were fellow academics who were like, I need training in how to run a meeting. And I was like, I've been running meetings since like college, because I was really involved in my student organizations, right? So I ended up in leadership positions in a couple of them, and it worked really well. In terms of management, we want to manage individuals and or teams, coordinate projects, and prioritize individual and team tasks. And then for service orientation, seeking ways to help people by displaying empathy, maintaining a focus on the people you're working with or for, and engaging in the community. So this is, you know, service learning, which I incorporate into my psych of law class, but it's also just like empathy for your fellow students. Technological, flexibility and adaptability to new systems, right? And the frustration of when they don't work, right? Being willing and able to learn and or adapt to new computer platforms, operating systems, and software programs. We are struggling with this right now. I don't think you all have had to deal with it in the same way, but they're implementing a new system for financial things, for like purchasing. And so I was ordering the codes that we use for our departmental assessment, and just like figuring out how to do that in the new system took me an hour, right? But now the next time I go to do it, I'll know what I'm doing, right? And I figured it out on my own. Familiarity with hardware and software. You all know how to use Google Suites, Office Suites, right? If you take statistics and methods, you'll learn how to use SPSS, right? You know how to do other basic things. And then learning about other things like building and maintaining websites. A lot of the programs that are out there are really easy for that now. All right, so then I have a couple videos about like, what can you actually do with a psych major, particularly if you don't want to go to grad schools, or at least not right away, and like fair, right? So, and then I do have a lot of information, which we'll probably start looking at today and finish looking at on Friday, related to graduate schools. So these are just
Watching our videos is a fun way to learn some basic facts about psychology. But if you really want to dive deep into this world, then you might want to consider pursuing post-secondary education. Unfortunately, being the world's biggest Psych2Go fan doesn't quite carry the same weight on your resume. If you're dreaming of being a psychologist or a psychotherapist, then you need the education to back it up. But those aren't the only options. Psychology is actually a pretty broad discipline, and you can pursue all kinds of amazing careers with a psych degree under your belt. Substance abuse counselor. The world is in desperate need of substance abuse counselors, and it's a great career path if you really want to make a difference in someone's life. These professionals are needed more than ever, especially with the opioid epidemic and rising rates of drug abuse. Substance abuse counselors help people conquer and control their addictions through various techniques such as therapy. This can be in the form of inpatient residential rehabilitation, sober living communities, or one-on-one sessions to help the patient cope with the causes and effects of addictions. Forensic psychologist. This career path is perfect if
I will just say, I went to pause and I hit the wrong part. I'll get this to where we were. The substance addiction counselor, a lot of times you can just get like a certification to do that with a bachelor's degree because they need people. You'd be supervised by someone with a higher degree. But there are a lot of options for that.
This career path is perfect if you dream of fighting crime with your psych degree. Forensic psychologists dive deep into the minds of criminals, trying to understand their motivations and deep underlying issues. They're often in charge of deciding whether or not a criminal is a threat to the public after they've been convicted. You might not be on the front lines with the police, but you'll be fighting for justice nonetheless. Sports psychologist. You'll love this career path if you're a huge sports fan. Although athletes might seem like superhumans to us mere mortals, they suffer from the same psychological issues as the rest of us. And as any sports fan knows, athletes seriously underperform when their confidence starts to slip. These days, professional sports teams spend a fortune on sports psychologists. They train athletes to manage their stress and energy, help control their concentration and attention, and support techniques such as mental practice and visualization. Parole officer. We've all heard of parole officers before, but some of our viewers might not know that they rely heavily on psychological knowledge. With a bachelor's degree in psychology, you can jump straight into this job, making it a great option for students who don't want to spend up to 12 years in university. After spending years or decades in prison, former inmates may have great difficulty in readjusting to civilian life. That's where you come in. They help with anything from job searches to making sure that they stay out of trouble. College admissions counselor. Do you love college? Never want to leave? Well then, we've got the perfect job for you. With a bachelor's degree in psychology, it should be pretty easy to find work as a college admissions counselor. In this job, you'll help applicants enroll in their dream colleges. You'll help them with every step, including finances and helping students plan their academic pathways. You'll mostly work within colleges and universities, although you might also help high school students as a guidance counselor. Experimental psychologist.
Yeah, one really interesting thing is if any of you in here want to be a guidance counselor, again, you can do that with just a bachelor's degree. Now, if you want to be like a school psychologist or a school counselor, you're probably gonna need at least a master's to do that, but guidance counselors don't need any formal training beyond a bachelor's.
This is for all of you mad scientists out there. Experimental psychologists work in research labs, and they get to conduct all the amazing experiments we read about in major articles and studies. For the most part, these professionals focus on interesting theories and topics related to human behavior. At the very least, you'll need a bachelor's degree. Math and statistics skills are also a big plus. Clinical psychologist. This is what most people think when they hear psychologist. Clinical psychologists actually sit down with patients, diagnose mental disorders, and conduct psychotherapy. You can create your own private practice with this career path, which many psych students dream of. However, to reach this level, you'll need a doctoral degree. Although these psychologists work directly with patients, they might also publish their findings in journals. This is definitely the most common career path for psychology majors out there.
Now, one thing that's really interesting that people don't realize is a lot of times with a master's in clinical or counseling psychology in Virginia, you can get licensed and you can practice. And in fact, that's a lot of the folks who are on the ground doing therapy across the country, honestly, are people with master's degree who might be LPCs, licensed professional counselors, or LMFTs, licensed marriage and family therapists, or LISW, LCSW, which are licenses in social work. So if you're thinking like you just want to do therapy, you might want to go more that master's route rather than the doctoral degree. Although you certainly could have a private practice with a doctoral degree. A lot of folks with doctorates are like me, and they end up at universities and colleges teaching and doing research. Some of them also have their own private practices or see people through their jobs as well. But that's something to kind of think about there too.
Marriage therapist. This is a great option if you're aiming for a master's degree. After you get your bachelor's degree, you can get a master's specifically in marriage counseling. After that, you can start helping couples strengthen their relationships and help identify struggles they may be having at home. Marriage therapists provide a neutral space for partners to discuss what may be negatively impacting their marriage. Your job is to facilitate an open discussion and provide suggestions to strengthening their relationship. Military.
Actually, that's something I meant to say when I paused before. But if you're going to go like this marriage counselor or any kind of therapist level and you do want to open a private practice, what I highly recommend is while you're here, take some business classes. Because in your master's, in your doctoral program, you don't get any of that training, which is really unfortunate since a lot of people do go that direction, right? So having some of that know-how is really important.
Psychologist. War takes an enormous toll on the human mind, and we're only just beginning to understand the extent of this. As a military psychologist, you'll be helping members of the armed forces with various issues, such as PTSD. Some military psychologists even deploy with the armed forces and operate in bases on enemy soil. This is an incredibly demanding job, but if you're keen on supporting your country by supporting armed forces, it is definitely a career worth considering.
And I have an alum who did some research with me while she was here and has done research other places while she's in the military. And she actually is now going through one of the military universities to get her PhD in clinical psychology. And when you do that, they typically pay for your education. What they ask is that you give them X number of years afterwards of service within the military.
Speech language pathologist. Let's end things with something a little obscure. A speech language pathologist helps people with their speech patterns. This goes much deeper than just eliminating stutters or lisps. They also help with language delay, reading comprehension, writing, and basically every disorder related to speech or communication. To become a speech language pathologist, you need to have a master's degree. What do you think of the career paths we've mentioned?
And speech language pathology is a good thing to go into if you're in particular looking to work with kiddos. A lot of times you're working with kiddos there. So my next slides, and we'll only get through a couple of them today, but that's okay, because we can continue on Friday. Are really talking about, okay, let's say you do decide you don't want to go just right out of your bachelor's, you do want to go the grad school route. And so I added a bunch of slides about this year, to try to demystify the process. Because it is a little like smoke and mirrors, to be perfectly honest. Okay, so master's programs, some of them will have a research basis, and you'll do a master's thesis that's really comparable to the Site 480 project. People who take that class do, where you design and conduct a study, and then you do a defense, and tell, you know, committee of faculty members why you know this project well enough to get your master's. There are non-thesis masters. There are masters that are really just focused more on practice, learning counseling, learning clinical techniques, right? And then you basically graduate after you've gotten certain experiences and passed certain classes. And you take classes in a PhD, you are going to be for longer. I should say this, and I think it's something not to do that. Program length for master's about 2 to 3 years. PhD 5 years is a nice little underestimate. I would say it's usually 5 to 7 now. I was 6. That's pretty common for a clinical PhD. And so you are doing research in a PhD program, PhD in any discipline. So if you get a PhD in philosophy, biology, psychology, right? You're going to be doing research. You're going to be focusing in on research, learning how to conduct research within your field. And when you're applying to a PhD program for that reason, yes, like where it is might matter a little bit in terms of like quality of the school, but you're really looking for a match with a mentor. You want someone who's there studying what you want to do research on. So like when I applied to Kent State, where I got my PhD, I really applied to work with my grad advisor, Janice Crowther, who did research on body image and eating disorders. And so like you could be a great student, but if you apply to a PhD program and there's no one there doing the type of research you want to do, they're not going to accept you because they want that match. With masters, it's less of that usually. Masters are going to provide holistic views of the field. You specialize more than PhD. So again, like my specialization is adult psychopathology, but in particular eating disorders, right? So you start to really narrow in a lot more. Tuition in a master's is traditionally paid by the student. Of course, it's less of a financial burden because it's only 2 years, say, instead of 6. In a good PhD program, the department will pay you not only your tuition, but also give you a stipend. So you will work for the department, maybe as a TA or doing research, teaching, things along those lines, and you will get paid. Now, these aren't always big. To be perfectly honest, we looked ours up once and it was at like the poverty level, but we lived in Kent, Ohio, where the cost of living is super low, so we were able to live on it. And then insurance, in a master's you might not get it, but I had health insurance through my grad program. Now I can only really use it at the like University Health Center, but it was still health insurance. And so this is, again, looking a little more at some of these fields. And one of the things we haven't talked about yet that we'll get to in future slides is the idea of getting a side view. I'm gonna kind of skip over this one because this one's also like incorrect. It says if you get a side view, you'll be a psychiatrist. That's not the case. You'll be a clinical psychologist. To be a psychiatrist, you get an MD. Just like any other medical doctor, you go to med school, and then your residency would specialize in psychiatry. We've talked about forensic psychologists quite a bit. What I like down here is it does show you like average or median salaries. I don't actually know if it's median or average. And it doesn't say, so that's not helpful. But it gives you an idea sort of like what you're looking at in terms of what you can expect. I can tell you, I do not need that much. So like, this is an average. If you're teaching at someplace like a liberal arts institution, you're gonna make less than that. But, you know, you can look at things like being a social worker, and I think people here are often like deterred from this because they're like, well, I'm not a social work major. But what our social work major does is like give our social work students a leg up in social work grad school. But you all could apply to MSW programs. Students wouldn't have that same leg up, and in fact, we have had psych majors go successfully through MSW programs. So that's certainly an option. We talked about school and career counselors. You're often paid hourly. Mental health counselors. So you'll see a lot of places now that are like masters in clinical mental health counseling. This is gonna be like a clinical master's or counseling master's. It's gonna get you ready to do that. You can do a doctorate in some of these as well. Oftentimes, in something like social work or mental health counseling, you're only gonna go and get that doctorate if you want to teach other people how to do that. So for example, like, if you've been an MSW for a while, and you're like, I really like this, I'm gonna go back and teach, you'll go get a doctorate in social work, but you wouldn't be able to practice. If that makes sense. Sports psychologists, like I said, there are master's programs, nothing is formalized. Sports psychology is a little bit of the wild, wild west right now. But it is a growing field, and as I mentioned, you get really good at it, a pro team might hire you, and then your salary is gonna be more high-end. That's something higher, right? All right, we'll stop there for today, and I have a whole bunch more slides about grad school and jobs and things like that that we'll go over on Friday. Ooh.